Good day, boys and girls. It is the 15th. The 15th of November. And it's starting to look like winter. Temperatures are dropping. They're still plus side of freezing, but not by much. Soon we will be in winter. Yay. Anyways, yes, I did shave the beard. I think I'll let it go back out again. Goatee. Or as in Russian, it's called the Spaniard. Don, don, don. So, what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about how screwed the U.S. financial system really is. And what are we talking about? We're talking about... one second. Need to lower the camera for a little bit. Out of sight. Okay, we're back. We're going to talk about short-term interest rates. The death knell of the U.S. dollar and the U.S. economy. And it's going to come fast. It already is. It's just going to pile up and pile up. So here's the thing. Short-term interest rates, this is what the U.S. government pays on its treasury bonds. On its treasuries, it goes in 30 to 40 year cycles. On the high side, it's about 5.5%. On the low side, well, effectively it was a negative interest rate, so we'll just call it zero. And that's what it went to. So all this massive U.S. debt was piled up during the low cycle. Let's not forget that 80-something% of the U.S. dollars in circulation right now, whether electronic or physical, were created over the last 40 years. Let that sink in. So how much debt the U.S. had before that. And the 32 trillion in debt that the U.S. has, that's just federal debt. That's not counting state, municipal or county debts. Never mind corporate and public debt. Or private debt, I'm sorry. It's just public debt. And 32 trillion, you can add probably another 10 trillion to that once you count up all the states, municipalities, counties. Yeah. So anyways, we go on. So what does that mean? First of all, short-term interest rates, this covers 1 year to about 10-year treasury bills, of which there is a gigantic slew that is ending right now, or has just ended, and have to be renewed, rolled over, but with new interest rates. Rolled over into, so you basically, you take all that debt and you resell it again as treasury bills, because it's time to pay the treasury bill. And meanwhile, that between that 1 year and 10 years of treasury bills, you're just paying interest. So how much does that change the balance? Well, it changes from about $150 billion to service the interest on that debt up to close to $1 trillion. That's right. So the U.S. government takes in approximately $2.5 trillion in taxes. Spending right now approximately $4 trillion plus. So it's piling up a debt of about $1 to $1.5 trillion yearly. That's how much the debt grows. So the deficit is $1.5 trillion. The debt grows by that $1.5 trillion yearly. That's when it was paying about $150 billion to service that short-term debt. Now we're heading up to $1 trillion. So it's got to come up with $1 trillion extra dollars. So what happens? Of course, there's only one way the U.S. government's ever going to do that. I mean, it could literally tax everybody to death. It pretty much does that anyways. This is one of the most high-tax countries in the world. Not that you get much for it, but, you know, hey, that's the privilege of being an American. Pay through the nose and get fucked by the government. You're guaranteed, every American out there is guaranteed he's having sex every day, whether he likes it or not. He, she, it. Whatever its pronouns are. Because the U.S. government's very busy daily. Screwing everyone. So, now it's going to have another trillion. Of course, that's coming only one way. By more borrowing. And most of that borrowing is short-term treasury bills. So instead of adding 1.5 trillion, it'll add 2.5 trillion. And never mind, it's perpetual wars everywhere. It's got to finance too. And of course, that 2.5 trillion that's in debt has to be serviced also. So the debt payment goes up. So if you had 1 trillion before, you might have 1.1 trillion. And the next year to cover that, you have to borrow more. So instead of 1 trillion, you have to borrow 1.1 trillion, add it up to that. And very, very quickly, you start to escalate. Yeah, that's what, that's the thing about finance. Debt payments escalate, just like interest rates can escalate as your balance grows. Well, in this case, your debt grows. So every year, you'll be adding 2 to 3 to 4 trillion extra to ask to service. That pushes the next year's debt up that much more. And the basic fact is the 32 trillion plus 5, 6, maybe 8 trillion that the states and the municipalities and the counties owe is already unserviceable by the United States. Pretty much I would have to sell everything in the United States to be able to ever pay that debt off. And the only way the U.S. as a parasite can survive is destroying other large economies. If they're destroying other large economies, that frees up investment capital from those economies, and the U.S. still has this legend that it's a safe haven. So it's going to get at least a chunk of that. The chunk's probably going to go to China. Obviously, with the Russian economy, it didn't work. In fact, the Russian economy is going to be growing over 3% this year. So, where else is it working? Well, it is working out throughout America's little whores called Europe, the European Union. All those little whores that are now suffering and now being busted. So, yeah. They're all the capital flowing out of Germany, for example, with its factories shutting down. And by the way, most of the German companies never left Russia. BASF, as a good example, is still operating in Russia full steam ahead. It told the German government to go pound sand. But that very BASF in Germany is going to be closing. So all that money, it gets freed up. Most of that money is going to go to either the US or China. So, as a parasite, the U.S. is feeding off the bodies of its vassals, taking them down fast. So, there you go. What can they do? Well, they can't do anything. Europe is going to die. It already is, basically. It's going to die. It's going to continue to die. Because the only way Europe is ever going to be able to free itself is quite literally with revolutions. It doesn't matter who gets in power. The only thing that matters is that they're not a slave or a whore of the U.S. financial system. But anybody who gets elected through free elections, they're not really free to begin with. That's anybody, the pocket opposition you elect isn't going to be any better, and often much worse. So if you want to free your country, you got to do an exit from the U.S. financial system. Because just switching government, still being on the U.S. tied to the U.S. financial system, you're just going to be just as screwed. Not to say that you're going to instantly be safe just by doing what you're doing. There's a lot that has to be untangled. But the U.S. is quite willing to bring everybody into sacrifice to save itself. I don't think otherwise for a second. So there you go. There you go. And the Ukrainian war is now being dropped on the shoulders and the lap of the Europeans. Schultz, the wet sausage, has been kind enough to double Germany's $4 billion aid to Ukraine to $8 billion, including sending more tanks, except they're now Leopard 1s. Seems he's running out of Leopard 2s. They burn real well. Not the Leopard 1s don't burn, even the updated tank. I mean, the Leopard 1 as a tank came out in the 1950s. Let that sink in. So this is a very old machine. Has been upgraded several times. It has to be upgraded quite a few more times, but in the end, it's still an old machine. And ain't nothing you can do to make it young again. So there you go, folks. That's the situation. Have fun.